I don't know. I don't know how to do a cold open for this. What's a good cold open? You can't. Air drums have no
A
sound.
radio show of air drumming is not maybe the most exciting way to experience air drumming, although
Right.
stranger things have happened.
Right. I like that. I can't. You know what? I can't think. I can't.
You could play music for your cold open.
We actually have music at the beginning of the show, but we usually do a cold open and then the music.
Film threat, film threat. Everybody's threatened by film threat.
I like his version better.
I like that opening.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Welcome to the show. I am Chris Gore, joined as always by...
Anthony Ray Bench. How's it going, everybody?
I want to introduce to the show a filmmaker and a longtime friend, someone that if you follow the world of independent film, if you go to some of the major indie film festivals, you'll find him there. You might find
Sleeping
him
in the back of a car.
sleeping in the back of a car, perhaps with his twin brother. You never know.
He would be in a different seat.
He would be in a different seat than you.
It's not like that.
Yes, but I want to bring on the Film Threat podcast, Ari Gold. Everybody.
Wow. This is a lot of clapping.
But okay, so Ari Gold. First of all, I have to say,
First of all, yeah, cut the shit, people. Like,
cut the shit.
calm down.
Let's cut right to when we first met, and the first film that I remember seeing of yours, which I'm assuming is not your first film, Culture.
Culture. Yes, Culture is a short film, 60-second one-shot short film, which consists of the actor Ari Gold, which is me, having a gun battle with myself, with no guns, but making sounds with my mouth, and ultimately expiring. And this doesn't necessarily sound like a great work of art, but visually it works quite powerfully. And it was actually made out of the frustration of the editorial process of my next film, Helicopter, which I was editing for so long that I wanted to shoot something that required no editing. So that's why I made Culture.
Well, so just so people know, like me, movies open at major festivals, Sundance. You've been to Sundance. Recently, you had a film at the Los Angeles Film Festival. This movie Culture got a lot of attention, and I recall seeing it. First of all, it was the best short I saw that year. It played before. I think I saw it more than once, and every single time, like, people just they lost it.
People went berserk.
Because it's first of all, the short is 1 minute long. It is on YouTube. Just look up Ari Gold Culture. You'll find it. And it gets a reaction because it really is. It was, I don't know if it was just like something in the zeitgeist with violent films at Sundance, but you in a way you're commenting and mocking all at once.
It was partially a reaction to the Tarantinification of the independent film scene,
Right.
which was, had been in swing for a while at that point. Also a reaction to things like Columbine and violence in general. I did it joyfully. I had this gun battle with myself joyfully because, as anyone who has ever been a boy knows, making gun noises and pretending to shoot people is part of being a boy.
Yeah.
And some girls too, but particularly boys, I think. So the idea of a fully grown person doing this, but doing it to the point of death, was interesting to me. And I didn't know what was going to happen when I shot it, because I only had enough film, and I did shoot it on 35 millimeter film. I had enough film to shoot for about a little over a minute of film. So I shot one take, and that was it. We're done.
On your website, there was like a list of rules that you had. Did you come up with those rules before you shot it, or just kind of around the concept that you came up with?
There are 10 rules, which are, if you go to arigoldfilms.com/culture, you can watch the film, and the rules are there. I wrote the rules after I made the film, as a joke. I wrote them in honor of Lars von Trier and the Dogma 95 rules. So these were the Dogma Ari Gold Films.com rules. And the rules were written based on what I had done. So, of course, they're sort of impossible to follow because it starts with, your film has to be exactly 1 minute long with no cuts. It has to have only primary colors. But the last rule is Ari Gold must appear in the film. So, and actually, there was a collective.
I thought it was Ari Gold must die.
No, no, he must appear. He must appear. I could do living versions, but there was a collective in the former Yugoslavia that invited me to present the film and my other films there. But there a couple different people in Yugoslavia made films following this dogma and used pictures of me to satisfy the rule that I have to be in the movie. And that was one of the great. I mean, when you're an independent filmmaker and you're not making gobs of money, things like that are what pay the emotional bills. Like, it was so wonderful to get these bizarre films from halfway across the world, from people, having a laugh and following my ridiculous rules. Well, they're still available for anyone who wants to do them.
But what's weird is I've seen, probably thousands of short films, since I've been covering film. And yours stands out to me after almost 20 years, right? Was it late 90s or early 2000s?
It was 1999.
Yeah, it was. Okay, so.
Which is unbelievable.
Yeah, almost 20 years ago, I see this short film. And it's
Kids, before you were born, I was making a short film called Culture.
No, but what I'm saying, the important point to me is that it stood out to this time. And Anthony even reminded me, he saw me on a panel at, I don't know, some convention, Long Beach Comic Con, and I mentioned your movie, and I encourage people to look it up. It's one that I reference often because I think too many aspiring filmmakers, they want to go out and they want to make their feature. It's like, but you haven't done anything. You haven't, how are you a storyteller? Make a good 1 minute movie. Then you can maybe make a good 5-minute movie. And if you can make a good 5-minute movie, maybe you can make a good 10-minute movie. Then maybe you can make a 10-minute movie, and so on, right? So Culture is like an example of a short film that I've never forgotten, stood out to me, and it's just amazing that's because that's how we met. I think we actually met at if you recall correctly, I think it was we were at a Playboy party at some condo, and you were playing pool. I remember this.
Sounds inviting.
Yes. It was just one of those parties, and I don't know. I might have recognized you as the guy from that movie, that short that I loved.
I believe you. I wish I could remember. I wish I could bottle that moment and relive it, but I don't remember.
But that movie stood out because it was, I feel like, in a way, though you may not have intended it this way, that short was a middle finger to the Sundance audiences that tend to applaud, I don't think necessarily the best movies. For me, a lot of films
It was a middle finger to a lot of things.
Right.
There was a lot of middle finger happening in that
But see,
movie.
I love that. That's I relate to that.
Threat. Yeah.
Yeah, I relate to that. So I just think it's astounding that film has sold. Do you still get asked about it too? I mean, not just on this podcast.
I think it's sort of disappeared into the morass of YouTube-ness, the kind of YouTube-ness of short form storytelling.
Why don't you put kittens in it? The new Culture exactly. 2 with kittens.
With exploding kittens.
Just do a remake of it, and you've got kittens, or just do it all digital, like everything today.
Yeah.
I think that would be terrible. I don't think you should do that.
Yeah, I don't actually get a lot of commentary on it. There was a brief period when I did get attention from it online, but one of the things about it is I think when it's a film, shot on film, projected on film, and projected as a short film before a feature, it kind of blows your head off. But if you're scrolling around YouTube and you're seeing, everything from someone with a digitally added penis on his shoulder blades, like having sex with a cat, and snuff films, and Russian traffic accidents, then Culture doesn't the film culture doesn't necessarily jump out as striking in that context, but it is striking when you think of it as a film, when it's projected as, it sounds pretentious, but it's projected as a work of art. That changes its meaning. And, the reactions that I get online, for the most part, for my work are for Adventures of Power, which has been living online for a few years. And that...
has that become like a cult classic? Because I mean...
For a few people, a few choice, brilliant humans on
Adventures
planet Earth.
of Power is amazing. I mean... I don't know. I loved it when and I think
you
I saw
were
it
onto it early, but
right.
I had a horrendous experience when I went to Sundance with it. This is where we talk about this.
But I guess we can talk about it. But I don't want to skip over Helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to go in order a little bit. But
okay.
The reason
air drumming, my movie about air drumming, in a way is kind of a spiritual heir to the air war movie, which is Culture. So. We can come back to Helicopter.
Well, yes.
But, I have work that is more FU and work that is more serious. But my comic work is serious. But anyway, so Adventures of Power, in a way, felt like it came out of Culture in some
But
level.
Adventures of Power, just for the members of our audience who don't know what it is, it's about a guy who enters an air drumming competition. Is perhaps, he doesn't know it yet, maybe the world's greatest air drummer. And it plays like one of those 80s go for your dream kind of movie. It kind of fits all those beats. Like, amazing casting in it. You're the lead, of course, in it. You got Neil Peart.
I don't know how I got me
How
up.
did you cast yourself? Well, and also Neil Peart is in the film. Of course,
Yes,
drummer from Rush.
Yeah, Peart actually, but
Peart.
I found out the hard way.
Did you really? I never knew
on
that.
set, I didn't know hey, Neil, Mr. Peart. He was like Peart, and I was
Peart.
like,
Oh
okay.
my God! I've never all these years. I listened to Rush in high school.
Same. I've always just Neil Peart.
I always called him Peart.
Yeah.
Too. I think most people do, and then they find out that it's Peart.
Peart.
What's he nice about the correction?
He was such a gentleman, such a wonderful person, and
Well, he's Canadian. Canadians are all nice.
yeah,
very
Canadians are
true.
nice, but he has a reputation of being, a god, but also reclusive, and I don't know. I've heard people say things about him. He was such a gentleman, first of all, to show up on set of a low-budget movie about air drummers when you're Neil Peart is, he did not have to do that. And furthermore, he had just spent a pretty long period in hibernation. I mean, not unto himself in his own world. He was very present, I'm sure. But, he had not been in the public eye for a while because he had been through a lot of difficult things in his life. And so he kind of came back into the world, and my film was one of the things that he did as he was starting to say, hey, I'm willing to start engaging with the public eye again. And what an honor to be part of that process for him as a human. And this is before I Love You, Man. And I didn't know when I wrote a letter that wound its way towards his management and then eventually to him saying, I really would love for you to be in this movie. I would love to use a Rush song in the movie. I would love to use Tom Sawyer, which is the most, I don't know if it's the most famous Rush song, but it's one of the most famous, and therefore it was not, normally when you're approaching a famous person, you want to pick on one of their obscurities or get them to do something they've never done before. So this was a little bit like, I'm embarrassed to say, but it kind of has to be Tom Sawyer, because Tom Sawyer is the song that when I was 10 years old, I started air drumming to, like, spontaneously. So I need to use this in the movie. Anyway, incredible honor that he said yes, and then he showed up, and we had a burrito, and he performed in my movie. And then not only that, but after the movie was done and was struggling to find an audience and get out into the world, he showed up a few more times to shoot promotional things with me. Like, he did a drum off with me where he plays Tom Sawyer on drums while I'm playing it on air drums in the like face to face. And there are so many people. That video online. I think it's like Power versus. My character's name is Power in the movie. So Power versus Peart. All this stuff is on the airdrummer.com website if you want to go to airdrummer.com. But anyway, he shot this thing and is kind of trying to drum his way through the song without laughing, and you can get these fans writing, and they're so either blown away and this is amazing and this is hilarious and I've always wanted to do this, or they're so angry. They're like, who is that guy? About me. Like, who is that jackass? Like, or they say worse things than that. And you can just tell they're really jealous because they wish they were doing that.
Well, I'm curious what the reaction to Adventures of Power was at Sundance, because I should also mention that we're actually recording this in your palatial estate here in Silver Lake area.
Not palatial, but tree-like.
Palatial adjacent. But
yes.
We're out on your patio drinking a little whiskey. Well, you and I are drinking whiskey.
We need to
Anthony's.
refill the whiskey, but
yeah.
You see how it goes.
No.
Once we start drinking straight whiskey,
right.
We want more.
Yes,
do you agree?
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, well, you've got some sitting on some ice.
I do.
Threw in some. We can
more.
take a break. We can edit it. But Adventures of Power, I'm just curious because it seemed like it sort of toes that line for me, which I think are the best indie films. The ones that I think really emerged from Sundance are, like, for me, Napoleon Dynamite, Adventures of Power. Like,
okay, well, it's an interesting one because what happened at Sundance was
I'm curious what happened at
personal
Sundance.
And professional disaster.
Well, look, to explain that
in a way that is hard. Gentle listener, take yourself into the worst moment of your life, and it was a total disaster. It was a midnight screening. It started almost an hour late, like 53 minutes late, if I remember correctly. So it was almost 1 o'clock in the morning when it started, and on a Sunday night. So we're 3 or 4 days into the festival, and people were tired. They were ornery. They wanted to go home because they knew the professionals in the audience had a screening to get to at, many of them 8 a.m.
Right.
For those of you who haven't been at Sundance, there'll be, really important screenings at 8 in the morning. So we're getting towards 1 o'clock. The film still hasn't started, and there's a certain well-known independent film buyer who shall remain nameless, who was drunk before the screening, drunk and tired and like going to sleep. And this is before the movie starts. And about 5 minutes into the movie, he's a big guy. 5 minutes in the movie, he stands up. He's in the middle of the crowd and starts pushing people out of the way to get out of the theater. And then, and at the time, Sundance had not yet passed any kind of rules about using your phone in the theater. So a bunch of bloggers saw this happening and started laughing at the fact that this important person was walking out, and they started writing reviews of the movie during the movie. So by, let's say, 25, 30 minutes into the movie, there were reviews appearing online, and I saw this later because I could see the timestamp on them. There were complete attack reviews talking about how this movie was a failure, this movie was trying to be Napoleon Dynamite, is what they all said. And because I played...
I didn't see it as that. I saw it as...
Well, you were smart enough to, but I played the movie a year, I think, after Napoleon Dynamite, or maybe 2 years. But because it's a comedy, because it's about misfit, and I happen to be, have some Scottish ancestry, so there's some reddish, tint to my hair and all of that. People thought, okay, this is, you have a movie about a misfit with reddish hair. Therefore it's trying to be Napoleon Dynamite, and that's all anyone could say was that this is a failed disaster trying to be Napoleon Dynamite, and completely missed the epicness of it, the spiritual truth of it, which became very clear to all the audiences that saw it after that night, and the political story of it, which, seeing where a country has gone politically since Adventures of Power, it's really about the forgotten working class of this country. And that political side of the story, whether you call them the Bernie voters or the Trump voters, it's about that. And it's about that battle to regain the heart you regain your own heart, actually. And the metaphor is air drumming. And so you have this completely absurd surface story about a guy who was a copper miner in the middle of New Mexico working in this insanely fabulous, huge castle-like factory, and his union is going on strike. And he wants to be an air drummer. And so you follow this air drumming story, but if you watch the film, it's about immigration. It's about, multiracial unity in terms of this team. It's about...
In fact, I never drew the connection between Napoleon Dynamite and your film. Never saw them.
Well, if you look at any reviews, particularly from that, when it came out, that's all you got. And as time
I just think
passed,
to me that's just lazy. But
totally lazy, and it caused me to have I was a film about people struggling with employment. I ended up unemployed for quite a long time after that movie because the attacks were so scathing that nobody would return my phone calls for several years in Hollywood after making that movie, as though I had laid the biggest fart of all time and killed a bunch of kittens publicly. And yet then slowly, like the slowest cup of tea that has ever brewed of all time, I start getting emails from people in Saskatchewan, and
because they saw the film.
People who see the movie, and not only that, people say, I watch this movie every Sunday night with my family, and it is my favorite movie. We all know it by heart.
I mean, I wouldn't call it a family film, but it's a film that I don't know if there's anything objectionable.
I'm just saying, there is a lot of that. There are a lot of families that seem to have, it's like Weirdo's version of A Christmas Story,
right.
In that they watch it and they memorize it, and they they know every single line of the movie, which to me, again, is just, particularly after what I went through, so valuable to know that there are people who are moved by it, people who cry. There's this scene in the movie that makes people cry if you're with it, and to know that it's really affecting people in this political, spiritual story about kind of being homeless in your own body, which is, presented through the kind of ridiculous metaphor of air drumming, is resonating with people long after the Sundance blogger crowd destroyed the film, destroyed my career for a few years, to the point where I was just living in Guatemala, and I just didn't
realize that people took the bloggerati from Sundance so seriously. I mean, they?
There were no legitimate reviews after
like
that
not
first
Variety
screening.
Reporter or any of those?
No, there was nothing at first, and so all people had, if you looked it up online for those essential first couple days, that's all you had was people would say, oh, I missed the screening, let me see what happened, and they would see these, oh, so-and-so walked out, and then it led to a walkout, and everyone was, horrified by the movie and talking about how it was trying to be Napoleon Dynamite, and,
But there is sort of a mass think, right? There's a mass,
absolutely.
like once this sort of opinion,
Completely.
like 95% of the people end up having the same opinion. Those critics.
Well, that's what happened, and our next 2 or 3 festivals in a row, I won the audience award with the movie.
Well, because
it didn't matter. It didn't matter from the point of view of the industry, the distributors, the press, the reviewers. It didn't matter that audience after audience were laughing and crying to this movie.
Well, it's a crowd pleaser that I would almost describe, this might be a little too far, but like as Rocky, where at the end
I wanted it to be like Rocky.
You know what I mean? Like where you're cheering at the end.
Yeah,
I mean
that's
the way I saw it. I was like,
it was a massive gamble. It's like
it
trying
blew my
to
mind when I saw it.
Inspire you with something that is completely ridiculous.
Right, but that was the brilliance of it. Like I don't know, and I also love that if you get the DVD, that you recorded the commentary in your car.
In a car, because I was driving around the country trying to present the movie, trying to build an audience for the movie, and
So did you end up self-releasing it then? Because
it was kind of I worked with a company, a guy named Dylan Marchetti, who helped me get into theaters, and then worked with a DVD company out of Canada called Phase 4 for the release. But it was, I mean, the DVD was kind of supported a little bit. It was somewhere in between a self-release and a re-release. But yeah, I was in the back of a car, sleeping in the back of a car, I was in costume, driving around the country, going theater to theater and presenting it. And I will say that occasionally I would stand in front of the theater dressed as Power in my orange jumpsuit, and I would meet a young lady. So there were some, it wasn't horrendous, but it was hard work. And the payoff is that I think, I had a really strange experience in Portland. I was dressed as my character Power, standing in front of a theater, handing out cards like, come see my movie, come see my movie. And this guy walks by with his girlfriend, and they stopped, and he's like, wait a minute, you're Power. And you got to understand, this movie is like tiny,
Right.
I said, what? Huh? Like, how do you know? You guys know who I am? They were like, yeah, you're Power. And the girl says, pointing at her boyfriend, he played you for Halloween. And
you have people cosplaying you?
So people were cosplaying me for Halloween, and yet, and I said, what? I can't believe anyone's even heard of this movie. Like, so you're coming to the screening? And they were like, it's screening? And I said, God. I'm in Portland screening the movie. And they were like, really? And then I realized the challenge of indie distribution is that there could be a guy who saw my thing online, dressed as me for Halloween, and didn't know that the film was playing 2 blocks from where he lived. And that was kind of a beautiful moment in that I realized that I had some fans, and a horrifying moment in that I realized that those same fans weren't necessarily going to come to the screening because they just didn't know. I didn't have the advertising dollars to tell people that I was in town. And that was a hard lesson.
Well, so what are the lessons from Adventures of Power that you've taken into your new film? And I still don't want to forget about Helicopter.
Okay.
Because
we can talk about Helicopter.
That's an important film.
Well,
so
we can talk about Helicopter if you want, but
yeah.
And I'm going to build on it, which maybe I haven't told you about, but
okay.
So what was your question?
Well, no, just the lessons you took from Adventures of Power to the new film, which I have not seen.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
In which you do not air drum.
I do not air drum in it, although I do have a little cameo appearance for people like you.
Oh, so wait.
Little moment that I'm in the film that you will enjoy. It's a secret moment. It's like a Hitchcockian, you barely notice me, and it's quite funny the way I appear.
Well, I don't know anything about the new movie other than...
it's called The Song of Sway Lake.
Yeah.
I can explain the title, and
yes,
that'll
please.
say something. The is a definite thing. Song is the most powerful way, maybe other than smell, that you can conjure up deep memories. Of implies possession. So it's a film about people who want to possess something that they cannot possess. Sway is what we all need in life in order to actually be present. We need to be in flow. We need to, surf the wave of life. We need to sway with life, sway with the dance of life, as hard as that is to be in reality, I think, for many of us. And lake is the deep water of life and death that possesses everything that we've ever dreamed, everything we've ever lost, and it also represents everywhere we're going to be when we die.
Well, I think, first of all, it's amazing that you put that much thought into...
Especially when I'm drunk.
Every word of the title. You are not drunk from,
That was a pretty big... I poured myself a lot more. But so that's the spiritual meaning of the movie, The Song of Sway Lake. The technical story is it's about a kid who loves old music from the 1940s who goes up to his grandmother's lake house to rob her of this valuable old record that he believes will kind of save his soul. And his best friend, who is a Russian drifter and immigrant, falls in love with his grandmother, who represents the America that the Russian always dreamed of as a child. And so it's a kind of a love triangle between a grandmother, grandson, and a and a Russian, and it's about love and loss and memory and death and swimsuits on a lake, and it's quite beautiful.
What was the reaction at Los Angeles Film Festival? Because it just
I gotta say,
last week.
Premiered last week. After my experience with Adventures of Power at Sundance, I have to say I was completely terrified of a first screening. I was totally terrified. I was almost PTSD level.
It seems like you had a better time slot, right? Like,
well,
it
we
wasn't
weren't playing at midnight.
Yeah.
But still, you don't know what's going to happen, and I was blown away by the reaction, and just it was. And I didn't even know watching the movie because it's not a comedy.
And that's tough because LA audiences actually think
LA audiences are really tough.
They're actually the worst audiences are LA audiences.
Yeah.
I think Sundance audiences can be good because there's something in the air.
Well, they're away from
they're
away from home.
It's vacation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So the people were really moved by the film. There were people. I know it's gonna sound like I'm full of shit, but there were people who came up to me after the screening and said, "This is my new favorite film of all time."
You're full of shit.
Yeah, exactly. But there were people who said it was their favorite film of all time right after seeing. Now, maybe the next day they'll think, "Okay, maybe it's not my favorite." But people were really, really into it, and maybe because I was so shell-shocked after Adventures of Power, watching it, I was convinced that it was going over really badly, because there's a little bit of comedy in it, but so every time there was a laugh, I was thinking, oh, they're laughing at it, they're not laughing with it. And then because there's this drama and there's a love story between a 22-year-old and a 75-year-old that is not played for laughs, it's not played for a wink, and this woman, Mary Beth Peil, who's incredible in the movie, is, there's silence when they're dancing together towards the end of the movie, and I did not know. I couldn't read the minds of the people in the audience. I didn't know what was happening. Convinced that it wasn't going over, and then I walked out for the Q&A, and I see tears on people's faces, and people are saying that they feel like they just went to another world, and they've just been hit with all these sparkles of magic, and they feel transported into another time, and it was such an incredible screening and such an incredible thing to have a live audience for my first showing be so different than what I experienced with Adventures in Power. And I know it's a small movie. I know it's a small, intimate, poetic movie, and it's not going to be Transformers, but to start my festival tour, to start my hunt for distribution with such a shockingly, to me, moved audience, and buying the things that I wasn't sure were going to buy, were they going to buy this love between these two people? Were they going to buy my brother Ethan, who wrote all the rock songs, the original rock songs in Adventures of Power, and he wrote the music in Helicopter, but he also wrote the song of Sway Lake, that is the song of Sway Lake in the movie, which is a song from 1942. And we had to convince the audience that this song we recorded last year comes from 1942.
Well, what you can do is you can start a Wikipedia page for that song.
A fake one.
A fake one, and all the fake history of the song and the musicians that played on it.
Yeah.
And I highly suggest you do that as a piece of
we could
viral
do that,
marketing.
But and I'll work on that. I'll work on that right now. But the audience actually thought the song was real. It's a real song, but they thought it came from 1942. They were absolutely convinced, and people were saying to me, Sway Lake. They said, where, how did you find out about Sway Lake? And I was saying, Sway Lake was invented. It doesn't exist. The history of this kind of aristocratic family that lives on this lake, and there are all these secrets, and Cole Porter used to go up there and play piano for the family at the wedding, and all this kind of stuff that is in the backstory of the movie. The audience believed it was true, and that was incredibly gratifying, and I think particularly gratifying to my brother Ethan, who had never written 1941 style, pre-war, like just pre-war style, late 30s, early 40s style jazz. He'd never written anything like that before, and he wrote 8 songs from me, and we picked one. And we fought a lot about which one to pick, and because it wasn't just in the movie, but it as a song, but the melodies became the score. So we wanted to have all the melodies be the same. So we had to pick the song early in the scoring process. But the song worked. It convinced people, and it solidified the belief that Sway Lake is a real place, and that was amazing.
You're going to have millennial hipsters saying that they listened to that song as they were a kid. You know that, right? That's going to happen.
So. I hope so.
Well, that's how.
Yeah.
So, what went into the casting of the 2 leads? Because that's also a hard, like, I mean, to me, I it's weird when you reference films that are more than 5 or 10 years old. You're not always sure that people are gonna, just having done public podcasts or, whatever panels, you reference a movie that's over 10 years old, and people look at you in the audience like, huh, no, yeah, I should look that up someday. But I mean, the only one I can think that successfully, did a romance like that is Harold and Maude.
Yeah,
a very different kind of movie.
Yeah, Harold and Maude's an amazing movie.
Yeah, but not what you're describing.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, I wanted this
so how'd you
mutual infatuation to be real. It was very challenging. I mean, casting is very challenging. The grandson is played by Rory Culkin, who, when he came in, frankly, there was no one else. He was so perfect for it because he carries this woundedness about him where he doesn't have to say much, and you feel what's going on. And the character in the movie, his father has just committed suicide, so all of that was very readable on his face. But casting the young Russian was a huge challenge, and I ended up casting an Irish actor named Robbie Sheehan, who he's not Russian, but he carries the spirit of particularly one Russian guy who I know, who is a director and actually consulted with me on the casting to make. I said, do you think this is crazy to cast this Irish guy? And he agreed with me that the only guy who had the spirit of the kind of bombastically unhinged and perhaps deep down pained immigrant was Robbie Sheehan, who is very funny and charismatic, and he's wonderful in the movie. And the woman in her 70s, we cast Mary Beth Peele, who was just nominated for a Tony this year. She may be the oldest Tony nominee for a musical of all time. I would imagine she's damn close to it, if not the only woman in her mid to late 70s who got a Tony nomination. But she just, well, first of all, I have to put this gingerly, but a lot of the female, well, any of the actors, but particularly the female actors of her generation, don't look natural, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yes.
And I pass no judgment. I pass no judgment if we live in a society that values youth, and an industry that values youth, and women.
Especially if you drive through Beverly Hills, just looking up the side.
No,
I used to years ago. I worked in Beverly Hills, and we would be driving down, Wilshire Boulevard and whatnot, and you would see what looked to be a very attractive woman in her 20s until you got closer with your car or passed her on the street, and clearly was much older and surgically enhanced. And that's, I mean, I think it's too bad. We're missing like those old faces. You only see them now in older movies.
Well,
or character actors,
that was
right?
That was a big challenge because, initially, making a small movie, and you want to get an actor that's going to help you sell the movie, and to older audiences as well, having a known older actor, they remember that actor from their youth, and then they're interested in the movie. But all of the people that I thought about for the role, who were let's say 75 to 85 or 90, they didn't look their age quite. They looked they looked like they had worked on, and again, I had no judgment on that for life, but for casting someone of that generation, of the World War II generation. The movie takes place in 1992, so the character was late teenager in the late 30s, doing the math. I needed someone who was part of that so-called greatest generation, part of that generation that created the America that we see of as being so heroic and created a standard that America cannot live up to and fails to live up to. And the burden of trying to live up to that great version of America is one of the major parts of the story. So I needed someone who really, in a blink, you look at her and you say, she is that queen. She is that, the girl with her captain boyfriend who then she marries and he goes off and is a hero in World War II 50 years later. What does that girl look like? And she looks like Mary Beth Peil. She doesn't look like a West Coast actor who has seen a lot of surgeons, and it just wasn't done in that generation among that group of people. And to have someone like Mary Beth who looks so striking, so gorgeous, she walks into a room and she just commands the room, and an incredible actress and such a sweetheart, willing to shoot this low-budget indie movie, shooting sometimes at 4 or 5 in the morning in the cold, and a theatrically trained professional who wasn't just great on set, but like when the other actors were acting up a little bit, Mary Beth Peil looks over like, what are you complaining about? I'm 75 years old and, I'm here. I'm saying I'm on time, and it's 4:30 in a.m. and yes, we're not getting paid, and yes, there are no heating lamps, and yes, there are no trailers, and we're all sharing the same bathroom, but we're making art. And she said to me last week that shooting this movie was the only time on a filmed set that she felt like she was as part of a theatrical troupe. She said it felt like Midsummer Night's Dream. Shooting felt like Midsummer Night's Dream, and watching the movie feels like Midsummer Night's Dream for her, that she feels she walked into a kind of magic from another time. And that's what the audience gave me back after the screening, that they had that experience. But that knowing that she felt that way on set was very nice for me, and she was one of the reasons that I think it felt that way, because she brought this professionalism, this incredible generosity, and then in terms of her the mutual fascination that develops between her character and the young Russian, we, despite all the weather and the challenges of shooting with the schedule, we managed to shoot the really important scenes where they're kind of in love with each other towards the end. So they had time during the shoot. We shot up upstate New York, in a town called Blue Mountain Lake. Or I should say, we shot in Sway Lake. Go ahead and find it on a map. No, Sway Lake doesn't exist because I was able to get swaylake.com. So there is no Sway Lake. Otherwise, it would be long gone.
Been vacationing there since I was 2.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know where it is, but most people don't. But so by the time we shot the scene where they dance with each other, they were kind of in love with each other. They were professionals, but they took on that feeling. And I was talking with Robbie Sheehan today, and he said that they kiss. I don't know if I'm revealing too much. At a certain point, they kiss. I'm not telling you too much about the movie. And he said his knees went weak, like a boy in love and getting kissed for the first time. That happened to him with this incredible woman in her 70s, and it was not played for laughs. And
because I think it would be so easy to just turn that into a comedic moment, which is or a gross out moment.
Exactly. And there's definitely, it's not a perfect kiss visually either. It's real. So that communicated to an audience, and there's only been one screening so far. So
what's the next? What's the plan? More screenings.
More screenings. We don't know yet, but
really, not like
nothing's on the calendar. But I hope lots.
Well, I mean, it must be getting attention now that you had a good screening at Los Angeles. I mean, being at LAFF.
We shall see. It's Monday, so I have to hear back from the peeps about what's going on. But I hope to have it to a bunch more festivals and to a distributor. And I think there's a lot that's sellable about the movie to people who are interested in stories still, which is maybe a dwindling number of people, but there's a story there.
I don't know, if you go to the movies, it's all I don't know. I kind of feel like we're going through like sort of superhero fatigue through franchise. I mean, I think,
hope so.
I mean, I think it was Coppola. I think put it best. He calls it factory filmmaking.
Yeah,
it's just
I don't know what to make of it. I mean, obviously
brands,
there's
right?
great storytelling happening on television right now.
I think that's where most of the creatives have fled to television because there just seems to be, more groundbreaking storytelling. I mean, most of my friends from indie film, they're all working on shows. I mean, they're all like, they're either in the writer's room or they're directing.
I'm writing one right now. I'm writing a show right now.
Are
like
you?
Like a big crazy thing, a feature action adventure that kept being too long, and I said, wait a minute, this
Make
is
it
too
a TV
long.
show.
Exactly. Why try to cut 170 pages down to 100? Why not turn the 170 pages into 500 and call it the first year of the first season of a show? So that's what I'm in the process
spread
of doing
that story
right now.
out.
Yeah, and
it's just
it
weird
allows me to get deeper into the characters, and television.
That's
the
what's
format is wonderful in that way.
I love it because it's not. I mean, we're living in a golden age of TV, and the film industry. Regardless of reporting all the high box office grosses, fewer and fewer people are going to movies. They're having to. I mean, look, most theaters in LA.
Theaters should be a lot cheaper.
Right,
they should be
not.
a lot funner. They should be a lot better looking. And I think things like the Alamo Drafthouse have that right, where they make going to the movies a fun experience. But you go to most multiplex movies, it's like the design
kind of
the
miserable.
theater. It's like an airport. It's like I don't want to go to an airport. It's Thursday night. I'm on a date. I don't want to bring my lady to an airport and because that's what they look like. And make the place feel good. Make it a little cheaper. Bring people back in. And also, I think audiences have been completely hoodwinked into thinking that if you're going to pay your whatever it is, depending on where you live, from $9 to $17 here in LA, to go out to the
it's more
theater.
than that for some theaters.
Okay.
The iPick is like $30 to see a movie.
Jesus.
Yeah. Cost of living is
people think
crazy.
that if you're going to spend that money, then you should get, quote, your money's worth, which means in their minds lots of explosions, lots of special effects,
right.
and lots of craziness on screen. And the heartbreak of it is that a movie like The Song of Sway Lake, which played at the LA Film Festival on a big screen, seeing a person's face on a big screen is so much more powerful than seeing them on your phone or your iPad or your TV. And it's not the Transformers that need to be seen on the big screen. It's the Song of Sway Lake or Repulsion or Claire's Knee or whatever. It's the movies about humans, all the craziness and love and loss and musicality of what it means to be a human being. That's what comes through on the big screen in the dark room of the theater. It's not the fucking explosions. And yet somehow I think people all over the world think that if I'm going to pick one movie to see these next 6 months, and I better see the most expensive one with the most big explosions and special effects, and that's so heartbreaking.
Well, I think it's part of your complete breakfast. I don't mind a good blockbuster. The problem is there's so few. I think I've only seen one worthwhile blockbuster this summer. I mean, it's been that.
Which one?
It was. I like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I thought I really loved. I thought Wonder Woman sort of had potential, but it way fell short in the third act. I think it's far too digital. There's too much of a dependence upon digital effects and not. God. I mean, the best scene in Guardians Volume 2 is a scene where people are talking.
Well,
to your point, you know what I'm saying?
My movie is people talking. They're rowing. They're swimming. There's they're making love on. It's not just an old person making love, by the way. There's also
But I
young
think
people,
that's-
but it's human. You get to feel humanness up close, and it's so powerful. I remember going to see Wings of Desire by myself, a midnight show in New York.
Oh, wow.
And forced into the front row, and I'm basically looking up the noses of the actors, although that makes no sense. But, it was like I was looking up their noses. But seeing it on a big screen, seeing a human movie on a big screen makes your heart change. If the filmmaker wants to change your heart and make you and remind you of what it means to be human, they can do it better if you give them a chance to do it for you on the big screen. And people somehow have forgotten that.
Well, I mean, when you look at fewer and fewer people are just going to movies. I mean, that's just a fact. So the audience for films is shrinking, just like the audiences for the major networks is shrinking, because to me, HBO, Showtime, all these other, pay networks, they just deliver better content. I mean, we were talking about Twin Peaks. We were on the way over here, but like that show is, I don't know if you've seen the new Twin Peaks by David Lynch.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just pure, unadulterated David Lynch. This most recent episode is just,
I heard it was great. I haven't watched the whole season so far yet.
It's forget that it's called Twin Peaks. It's just David Lynch unplugged, just vomiting his best creativity. It's a master at the top of his game. I mean, it really is. Using all of the tools, practical effects, weird stuff that's shot weird, stuff with sound. I mean, David Lynch has always been innovative when it comes to use of sound.
He does his own sound design, I think.
Yeah, he mentioned in a recent interview that like the best way to watch the new Twin Peaks is to wear headphones, like good headphones, because there's things in it that will only show up if you're wearing good, legitimate headphones.
There's also really a great YouTube video you got to catch where it's very short, where David Lynch talks about watching movies on a phone, but he very derisively says, on your fucking phone. He's just like, really, that's not how to watch a movie. You got to just look up this video of
You know what the first
David
movie
Lynch.
I watched on my phone? It was I didn't know that Netflix had started streaming this a couple years ago. I was on my bicycle, biking through Los Angeles at night, and I clicked the Netflix app to say, like, what does this do anything now? Or is this just a way to like tell them where to send the DVDs? And streaming was on. I was like, is this going to work through like phone service? And I clicked on, because it was early in the so-called alphabet, I clicked on 2001.
Oh, I love that film.
So
I watched that movie
started
once a
watching
week.
2001 while bicycling. And what's interesting is the first space scene in that movie, they have they're carrying things that look like iPads.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, wow, this is a weird
Well,
future moment.
when you know how Stanley Kubrick, because I do watch that movie once a week. I know this sounds crazy.
Really? Wow.
I'll have it on just in the background. I think I have the movie memorized, but it's interesting when you look at how some of the effects were done. There's just incredibly simply. There's a scene where there's just scenes where stuff is floating. Stanley Kubrick had to just figure out from a practical standpoint, how do I make this work? And
How were things floating?
just because he would just have them on a piece of glass. He would just move them. The scene where the pen is just, it's on a piece of glass, so the glass is outside of the frame, and they're just turning the piece of glass, and she takes it off the glass and just gives it to him. And it appeared as if it was floating in space. That's how that effect was done. But most of the effects, if you read any of the books, there's some really good hardcover books about Kubrick's making of that film, and all of the effects, he just had to figure out, how do I do this? And we've kind of lost it, where I feel we're so lazy now, like we can do anything with digital, and it's of course you can do anything, but come up with something original. And so that's my issue with blockbusters, is that blockbuster movies, at least the ones made in the 70s, had that heart. I mean, if you look at the original Jaws,
it's
or the
incredible.
original Star Wars, or some of these other blockbuster, type films, there was that the human story was as balanced as the blockbustery aspects.
And those movies adapted to their limitations too.
Right. And you don't, yeah, like with Bruce the Shark in Jaws. I mean, the shark never worked, so
they came up with the buckets.
Spielberg used it to his advantage. It's the fear is going to be you don't know where that shark is. So I just feel like there's a lack of imagination with almost too many tools for filmmakers to use. When the greatest tool is first of all the actors and emotion and also earning that emotion. That's why I think I don't even like to call it TV is long form storytelling. I mean, that's what television does well. And I think in some ways the Marvel movies have kind of taken that, like, yeah, we're going to release a couple movies a year, and it really is they're just telling the story of the Marvel world, right? And I grew up with those comics.
TV, yeah.
So yeah,
There's serials, like the old serials.
Right.
But back in the day,
yeah,
in the 30s,
serials.
the serials were the low budget
in like the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
now the B content is the A content for the
Right.
studios, and that's where things are. Because back then it was like, okay, you had the serials doing their thing, but then you had Casablanca. Now it's like the Casablancas are, playing.
Well, you would do Casablanca in space with a monkey robot, but I think that and to reference earlier when we were talking about Guardians 2, I mean that was James Gunn, who came from indie film. I mean he worked for Troma and did a lot of low budget indies, and it sort of brought his heart to a blockbuster, right, and added sort of his punk rock aesthetic. So I think that he, I don't know, I'm just an admirer of his. It's no surprise to me that my favorite film, but everything else has been kind of a disappointment. I mean, this is the season of the summer blockbusters. When we get into the fall, that's when you start to see films like
The Song of Sway Lake.
The Song of Sway Lake. We will see it, right? I mean, if you get I don't know what. It's all about timing, isn't it? With like these things like what's in the zeitgeist, and I do feel that like I feel America's
Robbie Sheehan is in Peter Jackson's new trilogy. So
Oh, wow.
if I sit on the movie long enough,
No, that's
That may
for
help
real.
us,
I mean, but there are seasons, and I believe fall is like when we get the films that have more substance, right?
Yeah.
It's like, all right, I'm ready for popcorn movies. It's summer. Okay, let's get to the substantive films, and the Oscar material, Oscar-worthy material. But I do think that America's ready for something optimistic. I mean, I really feel we're living in a dark time. I mean.
yeah,
I
if
just
you want to go on down that road, I mean,
Well, I don't want to get in.
you
We
know.
don't want to get into a deep discussion. I'm just saying I feel like we live in really dark times with just the economic disparity.
I mean that the economic disparity and the ecological destruction that we're doing to the place we live.
The anger at our
is just
fellow
it's-
countrymen.
It's what wakes me up in the middle of the night, and I'm trying my best to apply my ability to love as best as I can into my work. And the series that I'm writing is addressing these issues in a very direct way, and I hope will provide hope, and I hope I can get it made. But it's an action adventure that's very fun, and it's about where we could end up and how we might get out of there. And as a storyteller, that's what we have to do. Is we have to change the story that people are telling in their dreams and by their virtual fireside, which is their phones and whatever. We have to be the shamans who go, in traditional cultures, the shaman would go down into the underworld and face his or her own demons to bring them back and provide some guidance for the community. And that's what artists have to do, desperately have to do right now.
Well, we need it right now because I'm really curious to see what films are going to be made in the next year, based on the reaction to, how divided, this country is. Not just this country. I mean, the world at this point. I think that we've reached critical mass on this planet where life as we know it is not sustainable, right? I mean, it's just
the coral reefs
scientifically
are dying. The Arctics are melting, and
I mean, the Pentagon talks about, that I mean, first of all, the climate change is real. The Pentagon believes that, and like there will be disasters.
the Pentagon understands that.
The Pentagon
you have to
understands
not
it.
use the word believe, because
Right.
the word believe implies that it's a matter of faith.
Right. Yes, I would.
The
Yeah.
fact is, anyone who understands climate change understands that it's happening, it's catastrophically happening, and we are the cause of it. And people who say, "Oh, do you believe that?" I don't believe that, as though it's a matter of choice. Do you believe that you have a foot? If someone would tell you, "I don't believe you have a foot," that doesn't change the fact that you have a foot. Now, if you don't have a foot,
Well,
my apologies,
then,
but
yeah.
it's a real thing that we have to deal with now. We have to prepare for what it's going to cause, and we have to also try to mitigate the worst of it, and that we still have people saying that it's not happening. It's crazy making, because it was so hot in Phoenix last week that they had to ground flights because flights couldn't take off out of Phoenix because it was 120 degrees. And yet, I'll bet there's a lot of people in Phoenix who somehow convince themselves, maybe because their air conditioner is blasting hard enough, that it's not happening. What do you do about that? I don't know. You have to change the story. You have to make people come together around stories. And the story we need to tell is that we live together on a breathing planet, and the planet needs oxygen, and we cannot keep pumping shit into its face and expect it to nurture us and allow us to live. And this is every story that is being told now. In my opinion,
I've just never understood what the downside is of making changes. I mean,
the downside of making changes is
changing to other energy sources. I mean,
the only downside is that there are huge vested interests that can continue to squeeze money out of the old system, and so they don't want the system to change because there are billions and billions and billions of dollars to be made by not changing the system. And that's, you have the gas companies and the coal companies can make a lot of money if we think that it's okay to continue burning things as a way of powering our lives. But if we understand as a culture that you cannot burn everything and survive on this planet, but if we don't believe that, if we think it's okay to just burn and burn and burn and burn, and that the great way to make money and to boost the economy is to burn up our nation and our planet, then we're fucked.
And I think on a lower level, it's a short-sightedness. There's not a desire to learn about it. There isn't a desire to educate yourself, and I think at a certain level, you just don't care anymore. And I think that's hurting us too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people think, okay, it's not going to affect me. I'm old enough, I'm going to be dead by the time that, New York's underwater or New Orleans is underwater.
Florida will be
all
underwater.
Of Florida, South Florida's underwater.
I mean, don't invest in real estate on the coast of Florida because it won't be there in 50 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's science. That's just,
Yeah, and so what's horrifying to me is that there are people who know this. There are people, some of the billionaires in our country who know this and are selling their property in those parts of the country, and at the same time spending many, many millions of dollars trying to continue to cast doubt on this science, because they don't need to disprove global warming. All they need to do is make you think that the debate is still raging. They don't ever have to win. All they have to do is continue to confuse you and just delay while they continue to sell their burnt energy.
It seems like it's only being delayed in this country.
Yeah, the rest of the world is on board with changing, but
right.
But
including China, because they've seen the effects of it. I mean,
yeah, China's on
parts
board.
Of China
with change. Well, Russia's not so much on board because Russia is also run by its oligarchs. But we have a country now that's run by the oligarchs. We have, a billionaire in the White House. We have the former head of the largest oil company in the world running the State Department, and we have a lobbyist for the coal and oil companies running the Environmental Protection Agency. I mean, it couldn't be more obvious what's happening. Is we have a country. I think it was George Carlin said years ago. He said, "America's not a country; it's an oil company with an army." And it feels like that, as a joke, has now become a reality. I mean, particularly, the head of Exxon is the head of the State Department. I mean, this should cause people to be rioting.
One would think.
One would think.
One would think. Well, first of all, I want to thank all the listeners of the Film Thread podcast who are still listening.
Yes.
Because this is a recurring...
And those who are right-wing,
Right.
with our apologies.
Yeah.
That, I would love to sit down and have a drink and talk through this stuff. We never talked about Helicopter, though.
We never talked about Helicopter, which is also a short film of yours that blew me away when I saw it, and also describe, the way that you... It's very... I think it was Wes Anderson before Wes Anderson, in my opinion. Because
I never saw the Wes Anderson connection, but
because using sort of almost student filmmaking techniques to tell
right.
an
yeah,
aspect,
toys and animation and things
right.
like that.
There's parts of the story that are told using toys.
Yeah.
And
well, this was you mentioned sort of working around your restraints rather than just
right. You just
having
embrace it.
Digital. I'll do everything digitally.
Yeah.
So I wanted to tell a story about my mother's death in a helicopter crash, and then a huge concert that took place afterwards because my mother was dating a rock music promoter, and so when they died together, there was this huge concert that was incredibly alienating and strange to be, brought into. Be in shock from the death of my mother, and I was still, felt like a child, and I wasn't, I was 20, 21, but I didn't have the budget to do a rock concert, nor did I have the budget to shoot a helicopter crash. So I used toys for the concert, and I used animation for the helicopter, and I had no idea how these things were going to fit together.
And then you used real audio.
Then I used real audio. I used my sister to do the voice of my mother, myself to do my own voice, and then my brother Ethan did the music, and so my surviving family is the audio, and then this kind of dreamscape was the visual, and I'm extending it now. You will be happy to know.
Oh, you're doing a new
Alejandro
edition?
Jodorowsky, who the filmmakers among the audience or the film fans know who that is.
Yeah.
You want to say who that is?
Alejandro Jodorowsky. I love it. I love him. I mean,
So he was the kind of inventor of the midnight movie in the early 70s.
El Topo was I mean, there's a really good documentary about Midnight. I think it's just called Midnight Movie. We're talking about Eraserhead, to reference David Lynch again, and
Who you
El
look
Topo.
like. That's why you like him.
Right. I love David Lynch. But El Topo was probably one of the first midnight movies in the early 70s. It was a movie that, look, people would go and get high at the movies, and then they would watch this movie El Topo that's this just effed up Western.
Yeah.
And then Santa Sangre, also another great Jodorowsky. And then highly recommend that you see Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune, which
Dune movie never made.
Yeah, it is the best Dune movie never made, because his script for that, Dune is one of the most...
The team that he put together went off and did the design for Alien and Star Wars.
Right, they did, yeah.
That,
it's crazy.
He, without ever getting credited or being part of the system, in some sense, created sci-fi blockbuster language as we know it. Blade Runner Blade Runner came out of that, some sense visually.
All those science fiction movies, really, that came in that,
and he never
70s
made it.
and early,
And it was
and
all
he never
other
made,
people
he never
who,
made that movie
who
with,
had his illustrated storyboard.
Yeah, he did the illustrated storyboards and the screenplay and like a big bound, and he made several of these books. So he would pitch it to the studios and then leave that book. And that book was then accessible to whoever was around, those offices. But I'd love to see a reprint of that at some point. It has to come out.
I would imagine it's like the Incal is I have the Incal in my house if you want to see it. It's the book that he wrote after Dune fell apart. He
Right.
and the illustrator made a fresh graphic novel, series of graphic novels, and they built a whole universe. Have you read the Incal?
No, I have not.
Dude.
No.
You're
Okay.
you're in for a treat. But anyway, Jodorowsky, who's now in his late 80s and making movies and kind of found his voice again. And his movies, to me, are the best he's ever made in his late 80s, and that is an incredibly inspiring thing. He's done work on himself, as shamanistic work, where he uses a technique that he invented called psychomagic, where he gives people a metaphorical act to perform that unlocks or releases memories in themselves, and ideally also in their ancestral line.
So it's not like ayahuasca at all? Like,
well, the effects may
Wait,
be
you're-
like ayahuasca, but the action is very different. You don't sit with a guy chanting and
Vomiting?
drink tea and vomit.
Right.
But in the case of me, he told me that I need to. I'm going to save the details for the future, so there's some surprise. But I have to go through my mother's night that she died, and that includes riding in a helicopter.
Mhm.
And
And you've never ridden in a helicopter?
I've never been in a helicopter, and I am going to essentially take her home, take physically in my body, experience her journey, but get her safely to her destination. And he gave me these instructions, and it's an incredible honor.
You're going to film this, right? Or
And I'm going to film it, and,
Right.
and most people who do psychomagic acts don't film it, and I was concerned that filming it would take
that
me
take
out
away?
of
Yeah.
the experience. And it certainly made it much, much harder, and I've tried now 4 times to do it, and it collapses for various reasons, because logistically, permissions and all this, and helicopter choreography. I have not yet succeeded in doing it, but I'm trying again for the 5th time to do it in the coming month. But when I asked him if he thought it would be bad for me to film it because it would take me out of the experience, he said, "You're a filmmaker. You must film it." So, the maestro said, "I'm good. I should film it," so I'm filming.
I love Jodorowsky. I mean, it's having seen him in the doc, the Jodorowsky's Dune. I mean, he just seems like he has more energy than ever. I mean, he's
Incredible
just-
energy, and it's
just such a
late
passion.
80s. And I mean, the thing I remember most from that documentary is when, he spent years putting together Dune, which he was going to make, and then he said, and then it fell apart. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, and he says in the documentary,
When I'm going to make a Dune, I say yes. And then when I am not going to make a Dune, I say yes.
and that is an incredible, motive for any artist, any person really, but particularly an artist. You're getting punched in the face all the time, and shit's not going the way you want it to go. And when you get punched in the face, you say yes.
Well, that's weird because that is, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with that. I mean, that's anyone that does, especially in the world of indie film, because you're not making something, you're not making the next Star Wars. You're not necessarily making something that millions of people want. You're making something that's from a vision that you want to get on the screen.
You're making
That
something
you-
that millions of people need.
You-
They don't know
Potentially.
they don't know they need it. They do need
potentially,
it.
but just to just in the face of all the adversity, whether it's financial, emotional, all the, like, whatever is, like, all the obstacles. I mean, you can list any number of them. I mean, to persevere. That's why I just always admire any filmmaker I'll see at a festival that, like, you got here. This is hard to be in this place at this moment, regardless of the outcome. So just all the financial success. I mean, yeah, it's kind of,
all the financial. I haven't heard.
whatever
that hasn't
financial
happened
success.
yet.
Yes, but I mean, it's
I've
yeah. Well,
heard.
I feel like you can't really do it for that. I mean, I mean, what indie filmmakers ever made a movie for, like, I'm gonna get rich off that? And especially if you're a doc filmmaker, I mean, you're really just
Oh, yeah.
to me, community service is what you're doing for a documentary.
Well, I'm not trying to bring the subject back to the helicopter thing, but that that does tie into this full sentence is that Jodorowsky's instructions for me to release my mother's spirit by going to her destination via helicopter and a bunch of other shit that you'll find out later, is I see it as a second chapter to my short film Helicopter, and ultimately perhaps part of a feature film like The 5 Obstructions, where I look at death and loss and life and family from, a smashed mirror perspective, where that's one in one corner, that's one way of seeing death and loss, and another corner that's way of looking at first love, and another corner that's the way of looking about what it means to be a mother or to be a son. And my short film Helicopter would be a chapter in that larger movie. And this experience of following my one of my mentors' crazy instructions and just doing them, even though it's fucking hard and it's taken a couple of years for me to do. And so that's the idea, is that I'm telling a story that's very personal. I'm going through this ritual, and I don't know what the meaning of it is yet. But as Picasso said, not that I'm Picasso, but if I knew what I was going to paint before I painted it, what would be the point? And so my hope as a creator is that if I create, and I create as honestly as I can, then somebody out there is going to see my work and their heart is going to open just that little bit. And if I'm doing that and someone else's heart is opening, then they're passing it on to the person next to them. And that's my job.
How did Jodorowsky become your mentor? How did you meet him? There's got to be a story there.
We don't hang out. I wish we
right,
did.
Right,
I wish
yeah,
I could
well,
say we did.
Right.
But I pursued him. I was a fan of his work. I was a fan of his book Psychomagic. Really intrigued me about this process that he does, and I really wanted him to read my tarot. So I noticed that one of his books had a quote from Daniel Pinchbeck on the back of it. And Daniel Pinchbeck's a writer and speaker, teacher, and futurist, and anyway, interesting guy. He wrote the book about 2012 that kind of, whether he liked it or not, started the whole 2012 frenzy.
Can I tell you my theory about 2012?
Sure.
My theory about 2012, because when you research it, right, there have been predictions of things from the past. My prediction is that, or my thought on that is that what they saw was movies. What I mean is that there was a movie that was released in 2012 about a disaster with John Cusack called 2012, and my feeling is that they saw the trailer for the movie 2012 in the future. And I proposed this, I'm not making this up, I proposed this to a 2012 conspiracy theorist who, when I said this, a room full of people burst out laughing because they thought it was ridiculous. And then he came up to me after and he said, that's a very good theory. He said, because if you showed movies to a primitive culture, they would not know how to explain it. For them, it would be magic. It would be like, and I got in this whole conversation with this guy, this scientist, and I got in this whole conversation of what if you went back into, say, the 1700s and you showed the movie Star Wars? What would the audience from the 1700s think? And they'd say, well, they would see Darth Vader as the devil. They would see it as biblical. Luke would be Jesus. Like he was saying, the mindset of that time would.
Although Obi-Wan's the one who sacrifices himself.
Right,
so,
right.
know.
Okay, so yeah, but I mean, it was really fascinating. And then this got
He's an old-looking 33.
This
Obi-Wan.
got me thinking, like, what if you showed movies to primitive cultures? What would they think? And it's possible that the Mayans actually saw the trailer for the movie 2012 in their sort of.
Hey, I'll go. I mean, I'll go with it.
But so what would they see? They would see disaster, right? Like, if you look at Nostradamus's predictions, which I remember getting really depressed once in high school.
I did that too. I did that in junior high.
You did in junior high? I saw it in high school, and I was like, what?
We're going to
die. The man with the blue turban.
Yeah.
From,
I went through the same thing.
And I remember reading the book and the quatrains and Hitler was off by one letter.
Oh, that's right.
Remember that? Like,
that's right.
And I remember just reading all this stuff
I
about.
I was so convinced we were toast then.
I was depressed. I was like Alvy Singer in the beginning of Annie Hall.
Me too. Maybe that's why we're friends.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I was talking with my dad about it. Like,
yeah.
He there was a whole period of like 2 or 3 years when as a kid, I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to study because what was the point? Because I was going to be dead.
Yeah, or the sun is going to blow up, which was the Alvy Singer thing, right? The sun's going to
I thought we
burn
were going to
out.
have nuclear war.
Well, I
Russia,
think
which
that
maybe maybe we will.
I don't know, man. I think it's more likely now than ever, right?
It's fucking crazy. I mean, the thing is, there is so much that's beautiful in the world, and so much that if people understood, listen to the birds.
You
If
might
we,
be able to hear it with these microphones. You might, just a little bit.
if people were able to listen to nature, here's the thing, not to be all whatever dude talking shit, but like, men cannot create from their wombs, and so they will work hard to create, and they will work hard to destroy, and they will work hard to prove that they're here, to the point of destroying everything around them, because they cannot trust nature and women who can create, who can truly create from their bodies. And I think that's the illness that our culture, our world culture, has to get over. That men need to just embrace the fact that, hey, you know what? You cannot create from your womb. Your job is to protect and strengthen the true creators, who are women and whose nature. And all this violence, to me, boils down to that massive delusion that men have. And I know that sounds simplistic, and maybe it sounds mamsy-pamsy, and I know I've had a bunch of whiskey, but
Yes, we're not high. It's whiskey.
But I really think this is the problem. And until we as men wake the fuck up to the beauty that is right in front of us, we're going to keep destroying, because, frankly, we're jealous. And unfortunately, we're sharp enough to have made these really, really powerful tools where we can destroy anything we want. We can do it. Congratulations, dudes.
Yeah, this is
why I have an old woman as the central character in the Song of Sway Lake, and that it's not a big, it's not an environmental movie, but I think as an artist, I've been moving towards this, and this is why I'm returning to Helicopter, which is about the death of my mother, because I'm wanting to honor the creation, which is, I'm sorry, but it's feminine. And I say I'm sorry to those who would take issue with that, but I don't know how else you can skin that cat. And I say that.
Well, I
in
think
a pro-cat way.
I think that we're pretty fortunate in the sense that we have the luxury of doing a podcast where we're talking about movies and art and whatnot. And I think most people on this planet are burdened with
trying to make you're trying to survive,
not trying to die,
having
seeking some type of purpose that involves giving sustenance to their loved ones and families. So when you look at the population of this planet, it's mostly people just trying to survive. So the fact that we have the luxury of having the time to think about things beyond the next meal, or will I be able to sleep under shelter, is, I feel very privileged to
I feel completely privileged to be able to talk about this, especially with such wonderful men as yourself. But this is maybe why I say I'm sorry as I'm saying my
there's a little bit of guilt
opinions
with
about
that.
this.
Maybe a little bit of guilt
shut
comes
the
with that.
fuck up. Here you are sitting under a tree talking on a podcast, and but there's a lot of energy that we spend in trying to hoard and destroy and prove ourselves, and none of those things are necessary. And we just need to wake up, now.
Well, I have a
soon.
Yeah. Well,
in an hour, wake up, folks.
And I have a final question for you. which is your name.
I thought this was going to be the first question, and you could cut it and put it at the beginning,
I
because there are
could.
those who are going to need to understand why I'm named Ari Gold.
Well, because Ari Gold, obviously from Entourage, is
Did you just try to say that in French?
yes.
From Entourage.
Entourage is. I mean,
Uh,
it's an infamous name, but it was
C'est
also.
connu, mais
So does that cause you any
grief,
grief at all?
Suffering.
I mean, I don't know, because I mean,
amusement.
or is it kind of fun?
Look,
I mean,
my last name is Gold. My grandfather came to this country and he knew the word gold, and so we ended up with the name Gold. And my name is Ari because my mother, who wasn't Jewish, saw Paul Newman, who she didn't know was my third cousin through my dad. She saw him play Ari Ben Kanan on film, and she kind of had a crush on him, and so convinced my dad that Ari should be my name. Little did they know that years later I would be playing in a band with a guy in New York who had the same manager as Mark Wahlberg, and when they decided to create a show for that guy to make him a star, they needed a name for his agent, and Mark Wahlberg's real agent was named Ari Emanuel, and they needed a new name because they couldn't name him Ari Emanuel because they would get sued. And they thought, what's a cool sounding Ari name? And having been to see our band play, they completely coincidentally thought of the name Ari Gold without asking my permission or telling me even until it was on the air. And little did I know that that character would become really famous, and it would become fucking annoying for a long time.
Yeah, it was a bitch finding your YouTube page because it was just all clips of Jeremy Piven.
Well, it's like, yeah, Piven. Well, if you go to arigold.net, first of all, there is a guy named another Ari Gold who's a singer. He now goes by Sir Ari Gold. Very nice guy, and he sang on a song for me that I put on arigold.net, which was basically my big FU to Entourage. When the movie was coming out, I made a movie called Entourage by Ari Gold, where I... do you see it? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, so if you go to arigold.net, that goes to the page of my website. That is my big fuck you to Entourage, and also my kind of side fuck you to Avicii. No, I don't have any bone to pick with Avicii, but that video that was really famous was just kind of fucking annoying. The one that Ralph Lauren paid for, it was like the biggest video of all time. Anyway, I did a shot-for-shot remake of that video, and with a song that my brother wrote, and I kind of developed with my friend who was in Space Hog, who sang on it. Anyway, we made a really weird video that is my fuck you to Entourage. So,
well, in an act of poetic justice, I mean, that movie, the Entourage movie, tanked.
Well, I released my version of Entourage at arigold.net on the same day that the Entourage movie came out.
Did that get any attention?
It got a few little, not really. That shit should have been so viral, but it was like one level too weird. I mean, I think most of my work is like one level too weird for your average like viral.
But that's why I love it.
Audience.
But that's why I love it. Like, look, just I think the worst kind of independent film that I've ever seen, which is unfortunately there's a lot of them. There's one that takes no risk, one that is just sort of in the middle. It's like not mainstream enough to be a mainstream movie, but just not edgy enough to be. It's just sort of like in the middle movie. And there's ones, on either end of the spectrum that just really just go for it. And so that's why I've always admired your work. That's why I thought we should have you on the show and sort of go through your films, because I want my audience to look for it. And I want to see Song of Sway Lake. I think you gave away maybe a little too many spoilers.
Maybe you
too
can
many.
cut some out.
Cut some
Well,
out.
even if you know
I'm dying
that-
to see it now.
Yeah, even if you know there's certain elements in the story, I mean,
It's not gonna. I'm gonna forget them all once the lights go
you'll
dark.
forget them, but it's not about those reveals. It's the Song of Sway Lake is my best attempt, using the best of my abilities to bring an audience to cast a spell on an audience and say, take them into another time, another place, into a dream, as Mary Beth Peale said, and make them feel something, help them feel something, help them feel present. Because I realized that the three main characters of the movie, the grandson who's trying to destroy the past, his Russian friend who wants someone else's past that's not his own, and the grandmother who's longing for a time 50 years gone, all three characters are unable to be in the present. And they're on a lake that is frozen in the winter and is liquid in the summer. And this is something I struggle with, is being present in the world. And so I realized that that story is very personal to me. And if someone feels for even 5 minutes at the end of the movie, if they deeply feel, then I'm changing the world in some small way.
And it's interesting you said it in 92, because I think one of the things we struggle with in being present is being slaves to our devices.
Yeah, so there's no devices in the film.
There's no devices in 92. I mean, it was just, we had phones back then.
But it's a 92 when people are wishing it was 42. So,
Right.
even then they were nostalgic.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's someone I think in the Q&A said, I really feel like I went somewhere else, and I noticed there are no phones in the movie, and I said, oh yeah, that's right.
I think there are going to be a lot more films set in that period, because I think, modern screenwriters definitely, it has to be a struggle. You're setting a movie today, you have to take into account that everyone has cell phones, that information's at your fingertips, that a lot of problems can be solved by these devices, although to me creating a whole new slew of problems that
We have to get the microfilm over the border.
Right, yeah. Well, just send it to Dropbox.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of you could go back into films of the past, and every problem is solved with an iPhone or an app. So that's, I'm sure there's a movie in that.
Except How to Feel.
Yeah. Ari Gold, thank you for being on the Film Threat Podcast.
Thank you so much. It was a long, but maybe you need to divide it in half.
No.
Okay.
No, this is going to be this.
Okay.
This is a giant size episode of the Film Threat Podcast. Remember giant size comic books when you were a kid? They were 50 cents.
Best value.
Yeah. So, and we like to end every episode of the podcast by saying one of the most used lines in the history of cinema, which is,
Let's get out of here.
Should I say that with you, or is that it?
Let's do it again.
But what after that? The one that always that I track to every action movie is someone going, "Go, go, go."
There's that one.
So it seems like that should follow. Oh yeah.
And then there's also in television, the most written line is, "What's that supposed to mean?" You can look that up.
There's the other one that I always hear is, "Let me ask you something," which is like,
why would you even? You don't need to say that.
Like
it's
just.
It's terrible screenwriting. Anyways, so you ready?
Yes.
Let's
get out of here.